So, in interviews leading up to the release of this album, Annie Clark talked about how she felt she'd taken her previous sound to its limits, and how on her next album she wanted to do something quite different and draw inspiration from artists she had, quote, studied at the feet of, such as Stevie Wonder and Sly and the Family Stone. And I think anytime an artist says something like that, it raises a lot of questions from the fans. Foremost would probably be just like, can they actually pull it off? However, there will also be a certain demographic who have had their hearts broken before, and their foremost concern will be if this is a departure from the qualities that made them love the artist in the first place. So, now that Daddy's Home has been released, I think we can safely say that while it might be a slight departure from her previous sound, it certainly also represents a staunch doubling down on the overall brand of St. Vincent. When you listen to this album, it can't be mistaken for a 70s retro pop piece like you might get from Wolfpack, or a 70s revival act like the Bamboos. Because despite all of the funk and soul that it has, it remains fundamentally an art rock album, because it is as much about the aesthetic and ideas surrounding it as it is about the actual sound design and composition. And in that regard, it is utterly unmistakable as a St. Vincent album. All of St. Vincent's previous albums have been accompanied by some sort of idea or aesthetic. And for example, on her last album, Mass Seduction, the idea was dominatrix of the mental institution. And this time around, the idea is down and out in 1970s New York. And something I was, relieved to see is that the funk and soul aesthetics that accompany this idea are less a departure from her previous sound and more so an accent applied to her existing style. Because the core aspects of St. Vincent's sound are really left untouched. And that also really highlights what those core aspects are. So Annie Clark is a tone goddess. I get the impression that she just spends hours upon hours tinkering with gear and pedals to get exactly the sort of guitar tones she's looking for. And despite all of the varied instrumentation on this album, the guitars remain the bedrock of the sonics, and Annie Clark pretty readily admits that she's foremost a guitar person. However, I think it's just as important to note that she brings that exacting sense of tone and subtlety to her vocal performances as well. Because in many St. Vincent songs, the core mechanism that makes it all work is that Annie delivers a decadent, indulgent, nuanced vocal performance, which is highlighted and colored by exactly the right guitar tone to get the job done. Now, a lot of these tracks have a huge amount of stuff going on in them. However, I feel like it's mostly seasoning and spice to the core dish. And the meat and potatoes here is still Annie's stellar and intense vocal performances and how they are perfectly accompanied by the lead instrument. And I think that's really been the case like all the way back to the days of Marry Me, when there was much less pizzazz accompanying those vocals. Now, all of this is in no way to detract from the amazing production and composition and whatnot of this album. I just wanted to highlight that it's easy to overlook Annie's importance as a vocalist when you're presented with so much other attention-grabbing stuff. Of course, St. Vincent is not entirely about indulgent vocal performances, and I feel like her usual pop flair is here as well. She again worked with Jack Antonoff, as she did on Mass Seduction as well. Jack Antonoff, for those of you who don't know, is one of the world's most prestigious pop producers, and he just came off a Grammy win for his work with Taylor Swift last year. Anyway, Antonoff seems to have a superpower for just injecting pop hooks into any song that he touches, and I think his contributions are quite notable on this album because he worked on all of the poppiest tracks, and I think without him, the album would have perhaps run the risk of being a bit too intense or flat. Lastly, to take a bit of a left turn, I just want to talk about one more item that struck me as being pretty important, but that also might go unnoticed. So St. Vincent has always been known for using her flamboyant style to criticize issues with her music. And some examples of what I mean are Los Angeles, Pills, Digital Witness, Surgeon. But what struck me about this album is that where that flamboyance usually serves as like a satirical weapon to attack the issue and show how ridiculous it is, this time around that flamboyance is really used as a form of praise instead. Like, if you watch the music video for Los Angeles, you can pretty clearly see how it's mocking the sense of vanity that pervades Los Angeles. And then if you watch Pay Your Way in Pain, there's a lot of the same flair to it, and it's really gaudy, but there's no mocking going on. It's instead a celebration of the ridiculousness of the 70s rather than a criticism of it, and that's a kind of subtle difference. My point is mostly that in literally every other St. Vincent album, I've walked away with a sense of jeering criticism, but like this time I didn't. This time it feels like a celebration rather than a critique. And I just think it's really cool that despite all the same tools being used, just that like slight change of framing alters the whole impact of the album. Okie doke, summary time. This album strikes me as the best in the business, using all the tools at their disposal to produce the best piece of art they can. And despite a fresh coat of paint, Daddy's Home is still plainly recognizable as a St. Vincent album and delivers all the usual goodies that have made St. Vincent the biggest name in art rock. The core appeal of this album is its sense of aesthetics and its nuanced sound design and Annie's intense vocal performances. And it's really not reliant in any way on gimmicks. And as such, we have an album which feels distinctly inspired by works of the 1970s without feeling in any way derivative. All right, that's all I've got for today. I hope I have offered some insight on this album, or at least a bit of a different perspective. But yeah, that's it. I'm done. I won't take any more of your time. Thanks for watching.